Welcome to Sunlit Freedom, the only podcast where every episode is out in the sun. On this episode, I'm going to do something new. I'm going to read one of my blog posts and try and go further than even the blog post I wrote. This is one of my best blog posts, like people have really liked it, um, and I hope you do too. And I want to continue the conversation after the blog post. So, the title is We Choose Every Day Who We Become. It was the middle of August last year. I was sitting on the steps of the cathedral in Arequipa. As I sat there, enjoying the evening sun, people watching, I noticed a seller nearby trying to hawk off a few trinkets. A little girl, her daughter, was sitting next to her with her little pink backpack and a book. Her mom left her alone as she went around the square, selling. She sat there working on her homework. A few of the other sellers would come by, say hi, and play with her a little bit. She's a regular here. As I watched this unfold in front of me, I was thinking about another little girl, about how education played a role in her life, and how she used education to change other people's lives. This is her story. The Indian Dream. This little girl grew up in a tiny village in India. Her family didn't have much. She was one of 6 children. I don't think her father graduated high school. I think he even used his thumbprint as he never learned to sign his name. Scarcity was the default growing up. India was and is a tough country to grow up poor in. Her dad worked every job he could to put food on the table. Move paper in a bank, climb a tree, work in a forest, it didn't matter, he would do it all. There's one thing he wanted for his kids above everything else: education. He made sure that every single one of his kids got an education, even if it meant sitting under a street lamp. He succeeded. Every single one of his kids made it. 2 got PhDs. One went to IIT and went on to become a high level employee at Qualcomm. And this little girl grew up to be a physics professor. She had to work while getting her degree, commuting up and down hours every day. But she still did it. Now, she wasn't just a teacher. She was that teacher. You know what I mean? The single teacher who influenced your life so much that you go back to them 10 years later to thank them? Yes, she was that teacher to thousands of students. Around a decade ago, she got a promotion to finally become a headmistress. Half of her family joked it was actually a demotion. It was a run-down government school in the middle of the jungle. Almost every student in the school was the first generation to go to high school. It was normal for kids going to that school to drop out to help the family in the fields. But I didn't mention that she was a good teacher, didn't I? Well, she took everything she learned from her years of teaching and directed it towards changing how things worked in the school. Her first year as a headmistress was the first time in the history of the school that every single kid graduated. It was the first time any school in this region had a 100% graduation rate. It didn't stop there. Every year since, for the next 9 years, that little school in the middle of nowhere had a 100% graduation rate. It wasn't just education and grades. The name of this previously unknown school started popping up everywhere. The kids from the school started winning sports and other talent competitions and even beating the private school kids. The greatest fact was that they started holding their heads up high and they were proud to say they came from this government school. In 2022, this little girl whose life was changed due to education and who changed so many people's lives due to education got the National Teachers Award from the President of India. And a few months ago, when I was sitting on the steps of the cathedral in Arequipa, when India celebrated its Independence Day, she was one of the few non-dignitaries invited from the in-home celebration at the president's home. From not knowing if she was going to have food on the table to eating a table away from Modi on Independence Day. This was the power of formal education. This was the Indian dream made reality over the past 50 years. It might be obvious to a few of you, but for those that don't know, this little girl is my mom. Where you come from? Now, this isn't how I usually write or talk, so obviously, this story doesn't end here. If you want a simple one view story with a cozy feel good ending, you should probably stop watching here. Because the rest of this article might ruin your mood. Don't say I didn't warn you. If you've been watching this channel before, strap in. That story is the introduction. Now, most people know me in real life, so I often don't need to give an introduction, but I've lived in a very extreme world. When I was 17, I deadlifted 4 times my body weight and broke the Indian national deadlift record. I dropped out of college at 18, I left home with a backpack, $200, and I went on to travel 50 countries over the past 9 years. I never took a single dollar from my parents after leaving. By 19, I grew my blog to be one of the top 100 in the world, and a bunch of art. I live in a very illegible world. I describe it most often as the Balaji, Kovan, Ferris levels, bow-tied bull world as a default. It's this extreme hashtag digital nomad, hashtag travel the world is the only world I've ever known. It's normal to me. Um, Enough about me. My ego doesn't need to be bigger. Let's come back to this article. Over the past decade, there have been many times I've been perceived as being anti-education, 100 times, because I've been telling Indians in India to drop out. So of course I also do it everywhere. It doesn't matter if you're in Greenwich or Stockholm. If you're a young smart person, I've been quite vocal in telling people to just drop out and enter the real world. Keep it simple, stupid. I think let's start off this conversation by ignoring people who can only think about ideas in pro versus anti bubbles without taking the person in context. People want simplified ideas like yeah, education, anti-education. Education is making you woke. Education is everybody should have access to education. Instead of living with complex ideas that have nuance. Um, I'm not my mom, the first generation to go to university, and I'm not my mom's student, the first generation to high school. I'm a second generation to university kid. That's a very different position. And I think most people choose not to look at their place in society or where they are in that moment because often it would mean that they have to go further. Contradictions don't exist. What most people think are contradictions are often just a lack of boundary condition. I often found that for most people, I use heuristics to navigate the world. If I claim to be pro education, what are the boundary conditions? The most simple heuristic would be if you can finish this video, if you can finish this article, if you can watch most of my other videos. You don't often benefit from formal education outside very select fields. Over the years, one of my biggest hurdles were convincing already smart people that they are smart. And if you've read a book, if you've worked on your own ideas this year, you are literally in the top 1%. So if you are in the top 1%, start acting like it. By the sheer fact that you finished this article, you have filtered out that you're probably high agency and you will thrive in a world of self-learning. You are smart, you just need to start using reality to test your ideas. Side note, I do believe the other 99% can do it too, and I think I'm going to try and dive into that more in this video. You don't need people to support you. A month or so after this, I visited Machu Picchu. I was in the town of Aguascalientes when I had to go and buy my last minute ticket. As I stood in line, there was a guy in front of me who didn't understand Spanish, so I decided to help him out. We ended up chatting that morning and evening. I ended up being his translator to Spanish and we just talked the shit that day. As I left, he sent me his website and he said, check it out if you're bored and want something to make you fall asleep. Anyway, we missed each other the next morning in Machu Picchu But when I got back, I decided to check his site out. He turned out to be in the AI law space and was traveling every continent, giving talks on AI, and used to be the editor for MIT Tech Asia. I had a big laugh out loud at the randomness of life. We met for coffee that afternoon and we chatted for a couple of hours. The previous day, he got to meet hippie Jeremy that never talks business. Today, we just talked tech. So we chatted around tech, around AI, and then he said, I never expected to be talking about AI the day I go to Machu Picchu. But here I am. Me too. While we were talking about tech and the world I live in, he said the sentence, It was so smart of your parents to support what you did. I nearly fell off my seat in laughter. So let me tell you, dear reader, what I told him. When I competed in powerlifting and won the state title, after the competition, I had 5 missed calls from my mom because she didn't know that I was competing. They never supported it, so I didn't even bother telling them. They only heard about it when I came home with a medal. 6 months later, when I did good but not great and didn't get into the IITs, my gym obsession was blamed. When I decided to drop out of college, I knew it wasn't going to be a conversation. So I said I was going to do it with or without their support. My mom burst out crying and we had screaming fights for a month. She called me a disgrace to the entire family. My entire distant family called me crazy and said I should just go back to university. One of my closest friends said, You'll be back in a month if you don't end up dead in a ditch. The few people that weren't negative stopped at, It doesn't sound like a very good plan, it's too vague. I don't often share the stories because the struggle feels so far away, I can barely relate to it anymore. That's why probably people, when they meet me, just assume that I had people supporting me from the start. The point isn't to call the people around me and my friends stupid, but rather help you see the boundary conditions. The entire first half of this article was to highlight how my mom is the best version, the most Steelman version of the pro education perspective. She's doing all the thing people on the internet virtue signal. She's actually doing it. She's not stupid. She's just highly competent in the system, you could say. While I live in today's world. Another version of this is once you are no longer sick, a doctor can't help you. Most doctors don't live in a thriving world. They live in a not sick, and it's not the same to be healthy as it is not being sick. So most doctors won't help you get your circadian rhythm in order. Use a vitamin D app to get a high vitamin D, supplement magnesium, lift weights, gain 10-20 kilos of muscle, have a six pack all year round. Your doctor's not going to help you. You probably need me, my blog post, or better than me, health Twitter, because health Twitter is 100 times better than me. Basically, if you want to climb mountains in your 60s, and yes, that's a choice, you are going to have to let go of the perspective that your doctor is the smartest person on health. And you're probably going to have to embrace people with anime pictures on Twitter. Basically, what the fuck is a grim hood? I had this conversation in Peru. Everybody needs 8 hours of sleep to feel good. But Jeremy, don't you think people can survive 6 hours? Me. Notice the words you use. Survive. I don't ever have the survive conversation. We ran the survive experiments in World War II and we know people can survive everything. I want to thrive. So, I can say that I haven't taken a single piece of advice from my mom since I turned 16. And that's the exact reason when I say her story today, I have zero resentment. Resentment minimization. Resentment minimization is an idea around optimizing to not be resentful. What is resentment? Bitter indignation at having been treated unfairly. My version. When you blame someone else for where you are in life. But often it's a way to cope from the fact that the person you have to blame is yourself. Asian or Indian culture is the best example. Every single person has some version of the Indian dream I shared before. But every single person shares that story with some version of resentment. because they know that the story comes with downsides. Here's where my mom comes from, dot dot dot. So here is why I have to put my head down and get this degree, marry this person, deal with XYZ, aviation family story. This perspective leads you straight into a hell of resentment, especially if you're smart. So let's now talk about real regret minimization. It's obvious why my mom has a pro education point of view. Just read the entire first part of this article. She met the president 2 times. But it would be very stupid of me to just listen to her, especially when she's wrong about the world of the 2020s, which is why I never did. As I joked with a friend, half of your SaaS work problems come from taking people who don't know the difference between Shopify and Spotify seriously. It would make me like every other whiny 30-year-old Indian who thinks blaming their parents is an excuse adults can use. Every moment happens only once. You can only 10x your parents' income with a degree once. The next 10x probably isn't going to be a degree. In fact, it might be ignoring degrees completely. People say that they're respecting the sacrifice of the generation before them, but by having a shitty life because you're too afraid to stand up for your convictions, where's the respect in that? Every time I talked about dropping out, starting a business, entering the illegible, speaking your mind without a filter, not getting the COVID vaccine because you never needed it, and being vocal about it, aka the real world, it's always a version of if I decided to drop out, my entire distant family of 20 people are gonna sit me down, call me stupid, and hold an intervention. Yes, do it either way. Do what I did. Look at a person who went hungry because lack of education. Notice the tears in their eyes and do it either way. Why? Because if you don't do the obvious, if you don't optimize reality, you just build up resentment and continue to hate the other person. When the reality is you hate how weak you were. It's not the other person you hate. It's the part of you that couldn't stand alone. A billion or 7 billion people believing something doesn't make it true. Look at the life you tolerate. Until the age of 18, I had Indian parents, just like everyone else I know growing up. I don't today. What do I mean? Well, when I started traveling, my dad would ask me to send him the number plate of every bus I took. My mom was emotionally clingy and wanted to always call. But that wasn't how I functioned. It wasn't the social contract I wanted. I don't work that way, even with my close friends. So, I didn't tolerate it. I had to block my parents multiple times because Indians may not believe in boundaries, but I do. And I had to make them learn boundaries if they wanted to be in my life. So I basically have the equivalent of European parents because my parents learned to be that way and we have a good relationship. Which is why I can say that I only had one bad interaction with them in 6 years. How many people can say that? Acting as if you have to spend your entire life with the baggage you were born with is a perspective I disagree with the most. Here's an example, often from female readers I get. If you do XYZ, your grandmother will have a heart attack. The only response every single person should have to that is, if you ever say that again, you are never ever going to hear from me again and you'll never see your grandkids if you have any. Stop being abusive. You are going to be blocked for the next month and I'll unblock you in a month. There's no meanness in that. It's just you are enforcing boundaries that other people don't believe exist. I know I'm repetitive, but here's another version to drive this home. In his recent special, Hasan Minhaj made the joke, haha, I lied. I'm never going to donate to the American Diabetes Association. Ha ha ha. And my dad has diabetes. Ha ha ha. And I'm going to get diabetes too. I can feel it. I'm almost 40. Ha ha ha. So Hassan jokes about getting diabetes. Ray, go to the gym 100 times, get your lifestyle in order, and you won't get diabetes, Hassan. It's really that simple. A conversation on diabetes, especially with Indians, that doesn't start with the sentence, I went to the gym 100 times this year, is basically whiny bitch land, which I would never tolerate from anyone I know. And neither should you. It's just a joke, Jeremy. I have friends who use comedy as a coping mechanism, and I've often said that the jokes aren't funny after a while, but rather the person becomes the joke. It's not a joke if her son actually gets diabetes. It's just fucking sad. Honey isn't better than vinegar if it leads to all your friends eating too much honey and getting diabetes. Honey is actually quite nice. That's not in our culture. If you have no problems with your culture, then I don't see a reason to change it. But if you want things to be different, it is a choice. You don't have to tolerate the social contract we were born in. Don't let don't let people who never made any choices convince you that you have to have a certain life if you were born a certain place. Example, 6 years ago I wrote the best post on how to become a digital nomad with a weak passport like India. You will always find solutions if you want to. You can solve problems in months and get the specific world you want. And in that world, you get to keep the good parts of your culture too. Instead of dragging it for decades and always having to compromise, hoping that you're going to get one hug out of it. You just have to grow a spine and stop looking at tolerance as a virtue. You're not tolerant, you're just afraid. The word codependence has the word co because it takes two people to tango. Tolerance is a virtue of a man with no convictions. You get to define what you're intolerant to. Whatever you tolerate will continue to exist. Intentions aren't an excuse. The most popular response I've gotten to this over the years is that the people mean well. The people have good intentions, they love you. Most people think intentions matter. That it matters if the people giving you advice cares about you, loves you. If they say it in a cozy and kind way, like the first section of this article. I think, especially after the past 5 years, we should all question that. I personally don't care about intentions. As you can see, I can write like the first part of the article if I wanted to, and I did that in the past. But I don't have time for people who only get stuck judging information on emotions anymore. I intentionally often write and speak to filter them out. In the real world, you observe intentions, but you never ever use them as an excuse. Reality exists, and it's much more important if something is true or not, rather than the intentions of the person that shares it. It's easy to call bullshit on bad people. It's much harder with good, loving people who are just misguided or wrong. People will think you do things to intentionally be mean or hurt them. But over the longer term, they always understand that it wasn't ever about them, and you just had to do the right thing. Damn how good their intentions are. The path to hell is paved with good intentions. You can try your best to not hurt the emotions of people that believe things which are not true. But you never let other people being hurt be an excuse for not doing something that's true. This is what it means to not let empathy be an excuse. I want you to be able to do what I did. Share and think back to my mom's story with just pride and no anger. Just happiness for her success. The lack of anger only comes from being able to say, I have no downsides today from having a highly academic Indian family. And I only got here because I did the hard things necessary very early on. I negotiated my social contract early on. I changed my social contract. Cultural baggage is always a choice. Where we come from is who we are. but we choose every day who we become. What are you going to choose today? So, this article, I published it in November last year, and since then, a lot has happened, and also there's another perspective to this that I'd like to share. So, one of the things I remember was over the past few years, the more I've shared about my family, the more people imagine the relationship to be bad, but the better the relationship has actually gotten. So I do think this is a failure mode of middle class Indian families. So middle class Indian families do something I called how things look. They optimize how things look rather than how things are. I have this story from my childhood, which was when I was a teenager, I got into cooking my own food because I got into a gym and I wanted to eat high protein meals. And my mom bought a new car. And I remember when she bought a new car, I was thinking to myself, we need a new frying pan. Like, we don't need a new car, we need a new frying pan because our frying pan is worn out. And that was one of those first versions with the contrast between those two things made me realize that were living in a highly mimetic how things look, which was it was more important to have a car than it was to get a new frying pan. That's how most middle class Indian culture is. And I think similarly, another idea which is along the same veins that many people have is you keep the family fights, garbage in the family. You don't air your dirty laundry. You don't tell people that you block your mom. Like, what are you talking about? How would you? Oh my God, that's so bad. Um, and I think I pick another solution. I pick the sun, bring it out into the light, because that's how you actually solve this thing. So, for every article that I had written about my parents over the years, every time I pushed the limits of what I felt I could share, the better my relationship got. Like, it's been 8 years, and I would generally say for like almost 6, 7 years, there's been one mild issue. There's never, it wasn't very, I haven't had issues, and that's so freeing. Like, I can actually say that I'm not angry with them, because you wouldn't be angry with a bear. A bear just does what a bear. If a bear kills a child, you don't blame the bear if you actually have empathy, because you understand that the bear is doing what a bear is doing. The bear doesn't know better. The bear is trying its best. It's not trying its best, but a bear is just being a bear. Um, but you would avoid putting yourself in those scenarios. Now, on the internet, especially the wider you go when it comes to talking about familial thing, people have an idealized version of how these things need to go down. Your relationship has to be a certain way. And I think what people often forget is the context and the people involved. I'll give you a story to explain this. So one of my friend had about this started and entered my world, started working online, traveling the world, all of that, and he got into psychedelics and other stuff, and like basically started having more empathy and other things. But then he started listening to podcasts, and he started listening to, I would call, emotional men podcasts, and he started listening to Danny Miranda. And Danny Miranda had a podcast, either him or his friend, where Danny took his father to a mushroom retreat, and his mom wasn't open to doing mushroom, but his dad was. And over the years, he was able to talk to his parents, and then eventually it climaxed with his parents doing a psychedelic mushroom retreat with him, and they came closer from the experience. My friend heard that story, and within 3 months, he was annoyed that he wasn't able to get his Indian parents to do the same. And I think this is where sometimes you learn that the solution that you have in that moment is based on the other people too, which is, I would love if my parents said yes to climbing a mountain and doing ayahuasca at the top of it. Do I think that's going to happen? I don't think so. So my relationship with my parents needs to be very different based on that dynamic. But it doesn't mean you can't push the. So you got to pick the rules of engagement in a personal situation. There is no right answer here. You're going to have to figure out your own personal situation. Um, and one of the things is always keeping the door open. For this video, for example, this video puts certain thoughts into words which I don't think I would have been able to do anywhere else, especially in this article. So it exists out there. I'm never going to be able to have a conversation like this that often with them, but they can watch this video. And you don't, even though something is never, like you don't think that it might happen, if you keep the doors open, you just put it out there into the world might surprise you. So that's one of the reasons I create this video and I share all of this out loud, is because I actually think for every time I push the limits of what I thought was possible, the world created more possibilities. And I do think it's possible, but the rules of engagement, the way I created my relationship with the parents was based on me and my parents. And if you go on the internet, if you read too many spiritual books, you're probably going to create a version of reality that probably isn't going to work for you, because your expectations are going to be so out of whack that you think that an Indian family is going to do a mushroom psychedelic within a year. Good luck with that. So the pace at which we different people go through this thing differently will will be different, and you can choose how you, in what way you want to interact with that. I think we always have a choice here in the fact that we are put in a box. Society puts us in a box, our cultures, our family puts us in a box, and we have a choice. We have a choice whether we accept that box or whether we believe there's a different calling, there's a different passions, there's a different life, there's different values. And how we go about trying to bridge these gaps will be very unique and different for each one of us. But don't let anyone ever tell you that what you're doing is bad, it's evil. It's your choice, the life you want to live. You can negotiate you can create the life you want, and given enough time, the people around you get what they want. And with time, nobody remembers the fights, they just remember the vibes. So you get everything you want, and they get everything they want. So you just might have to pay the hard tax emotionally at the start, but on the other side, you can actually just let that weight that's sitting on your shoulder be free. And you never know, the thing you put off the table, the thing you said that would never happen, might just happen.